Convocation Radio.
I drove through the night, surrounded by inky black on all sides. It was like the only thing that existed was what was touched by the beam of the car's headlights. My eyelids were heavy and I felt like I was on autopilot, zoning out and taking care of the driving with mechanical detachment. I'd stopped off at a gas station to refuel on bad coffee, thick like tar. It had put me into that weird place where you're both wired and sleepy, a kind of surreal in-between state. But I had so much country still to cover, so much nothing still ahead of me. Out there, with my car just a speck moving through the absence, my phone signal was patchy at best, and I scolded myself for forgetting to download any music or podcasts for the journey. Radio offered muffled voices and snatches of melody between static, so I just hauled along with nothing for company but my own thoughts. Solitude and time, the worst combination. It meant there was nothing to distract me from contemplating the bizarre situation I found myself in. A cake had turned up for my birthday, left at the door to my apartment by some delivery person who must have been buzzed in by someone else in the building. There was a card with it, adorned by a watercolors type painting of a bouquet of flowers that looked strange somehow. The petals lumpy, with erratic shapes, more like fungus. Inside it, there was a note. Dear Eric, happy birthday. It's been far too long since we last saw you, since we were all together as one. As for the cake, we're getting into baking. We hope you enjoy it. Please come home for a visit. Mom and Dad. It was a surprise to say the least. A lot of families who aren't close have big events that score the reasons why they drifted apart, but mine didn't. Things just kinda disintegrated under the weight of lots of small things. A pressure built up over time that never caused an explosion, but succeeded in pushing us away from one another. But stoned and a little drunk, after a night spent on the couch half watching movies and aimlessly scrolling on my phone, I found myself eating the cake rather than searching within me to assess how I really felt about it. After a couple of slices, I decided to toss the rest in the trash. It wasn't bad, but it had a strange bitter taste. I couldn't tell if it was psychosomatic on my part, or down to their not yet well-honed baking skills. Confronted with that unexpected birthday gift, and the odd feeling it had stirred within me, I found myself trying to call them the next day. I couldn't get hold of Mom or Dad, so I tried my sister Lauren. She didn't pick up, but sent me a text in reply to the voice message I left, saying she'd spoken to our parents around a week prior and that everything seemed fine, but that she'd drive over to their place to check and get back to me. She didn't get back to me. I called her a bunch, but she never answered. None of them did. A few weeks after that, my mother finally called. She brushed off my anger at them ignoring me, that they'd caused me to worry, and told me they were all fine. But I didn't quite buy it. No matter how much I tried to move past it, a gnawing sense of obligation ate away at me until I made the snap decision to jump in my car and head out there. But driving through the thick of night, it seemed more of a bad idea with every mile. All I could think about was my dad, with his booze and his secrets. My mom, with her unknowability and her pretend smile. And my sister Lauren, with her competitiveness and her manipulative charm. And yet there I was, making my way out there. I had to stop myself from stewing on my resentment too much. Tried the radio again. Just as I felt I was in danger of actually falling asleep, the beam of my headlights revealed a bridge up ahead. I knew it well enough, had driven over it every time I'd made the journey, but I didn't know its name. What I did know was it meant I was getting close. As I was approaching, I spotted a light down on the bank of the shallow river beneath the bridge. It looked like a fire, maybe, contained in a way that meant it had to be man-made. But it was burning such a strange shade of orange, pale and smooth, lacking the jittery edges of real flame. I slowed trying to get a better look at it, and realized there was movement down there. My eyes adjusted, and I could just about make out two small shapes on the riverbank. Kids, maybe? Just shambling around with movements that looked random and uncoordinated. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m., and I was out in the middle of nowhere. Questioning what exactly was going on down there and coming up with no rational explanation, I was invaded by the sense that I was seeing something I shouldn't be, and a desire to get the hell out of there. But the light on the dash suddenly went out as my car died and I came to a stop. I turned the ignition, tried to get it going again. Nothing. I turned my head to look back out over the bridge, back down to where I'd seen those kids, and I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw that one of them was now next to the car, their face so close it was almost pressed up against the glass of the window, peering in at me. I froze, paralyzed by the strange stare of their beady, shiny black eyes. It looked like a person, but there was something wrong. Something about the way it moved. Something about its proportions. Head too big, body too small, skin too... I don't know. It was almost as if it had been sculpted into a human-like form from some substance other than flesh. From mulch or soil or something. I closed my eyes as tight as I could and found myself praying. Something I'd never done before in my life. I didn't dare open them. Didn't dare to be again confronted with that strange reality-shattering image of that childlike thing staring at me through the glass. Only after I heard the engine roar back into life and felt the car lurch forward did I open my eyes again. I focused on speeding ahead, not daring to look in the rearview mirror and get another glance at what I was leaving behind. I was a nervous wreck by the time I arrived at my parents' place. The house was dark when I got there, unsurprisingly. There was a shiny new, eye-wateringly expensive SUV parked outside. I knew it belonged to Lauren. Of course it did. Her latest brash projection of her success. I wondered how long she'd been there, sucking up to them, bragging about how much money she was making, bad-mouthing me. She'd always been their favorite, and played up to it as much as she could, no matter how much she'd contributed to the alienation that existed between us all as a family. I tutted to myself. I just experienced the strangest event of my life, and there I was still getting worked up about the same old family bullshit, the long-standing resentments, the deeply held bitterness. Climbing out of my car, I told myself to knock it the fuck off. I found the spare key in the same place they'd always left it, and let myself in. I was tempted to wake them up, to have someone to tell what I'd just seen, to maybe get some help to make sense of it. But almost immediately, I was struck by a migraine the likes of which I'd never experienced before. Like something was growing inside my brain and pushing up against the barrier of my skull. I just about made it into the den, my vision being invaded by pulsating purple spots, and passed out on the couch. I woke up to the sound of someone making breakfast. A few minutes later, Lauren emerged and placed a cup of coffee down on the low table in front of me. The tattoo on her forearm, of a lizard wrapped in flowers, one I'd always thought was tacky, visible as she outstretched her arm. Whenever I'd wanted to annoy her, I'd always criticized it, but feeling like I did in that moment, that usual urge didn't arise. I shuffled into a seated position and mumbled a thank you. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She went out to get a few things we need," Lauren said. "She'll be back in a couple of hours or so." I nodded. My head was still pounding. Nothing like just before I'd passed out, but enough to keep me from interacting much. "I'm gonna take Dad his breakfast," Lauren said, already walking out of the room. "He's a little slow today." I found some painkillers in my jacket pocket and swallowed them down with the coffee, but that too tasted weird, earthy somehow. My taste buds being off, the headache, the bizarre experience I'd had the night before, perhaps a hallucination. For a moment I began to wonder if there was something up with my health that might be worse than I wanted to imagine. Faced with the prospect of dwelling on that, I instead forced myself to stand up and decided I should probably head up and see Dad. As I got to the top of the staircase, I could hear Lauren and Dad speaking in hushed tones in his bedroom, the kind that means someone is trying to avoid being listened to. So I slowed, approaching the closed bedroom door as quietly as I could, and did just that. I wasn't able to make out much, the barrier of the closed door and the hissing of their whispered voices covering up most of it. But I did make out one thing Dad said. Does he know? I opened the door. Do I know what? I asked. That you just missed your mother, my dad said. I eased up a little. Dad looked happier to see me than maybe ever before, but I didn't relish it for long. His unwavering gaze started to make me feel off, so I moved over to the window and looked out. It was a surprisingly dismal sight. The turf in the backyard had been dug up, and whoever had done it had made a real mess. You building a pool or something? I asked, confused by the havoc that had been wreaked out there. Oh, that, Dad mumbled, waving his hand dismissively. Something wrong with the septic tank. All fixed now. They're coming back next week to fill it all in. I nodded and turned back to face him. Lauren told me you're a little slow today, I said. Dad smiled. Yeah, he replied, still beaming at me. But I'm starting to feel better now we're all together. A while later, Lauren and I were in the kitchen together, and I told her about what I'd seen when I'd been crossing the bridge. You were dreaming, she said. You fell asleep at the wheel. I thought back to it, how I'd opened my eyes and the car had lurched forward. Was it possible I'd just been sitting there asleep, having some kind of strange nightmare that I'd suddenly awoken from? Consider yourself lucky, Lauren added. You're still with us. I heard what she said, but something else had taken my attention away from our conversation. What is that? I asked. What? She replied. That smell, I said. Moldy, maybe rotten. It had hit me all of a sudden, and it felt like it was crawling deeper inside me with every breath I took. For a second I was worried this was yet another red flag, another warning that my health really was something to be concerned about. Introducing phantom smells to the list of symptoms felt like a potentially scary addition. Oh, that, Lauren said, filling me with a momentary sense of relief. I got used to it after a day or so. I don't even notice it anymore. Yeah, but what is it? I asked. It's from the problem they had with the septic tank, I think, Lauren said. I decided to get some fresh air to get away from the smell. Lauren said she'd join me. We walked out into the fields behind the house, staying silent for most of it. When I did try to initiate conversation, ask her about her life, it felt stilted and unnatural, her answers short and enigmatic. I've come all the way out here and you don't want to talk to me, I said, unable to resist what I knew might cause an argument. Give me some of your usual, I'm doing this, winning at that, beating you in every aspect of your life, you know, that kind of thing. But Lauren didn't look the least bit offended. We have time, she said. It'll all come. It was a fucking weird response, especially for Lauren, and the lack of her usual bravado confused me. But I decided to leave it alone. We made our way back to the house in silence. The smell was still there, but didn't seem as bad now. Dad had made it downstairs and I asked him if Mom was back yet. She is, he said, but she's taking a nap. I said I'd wake her up, but he insisted I'd let her sleep. We're old now, son. We need our rest, he said. If you'd been around more, you'd have known that. After Dad's comment, I'd felt so pissed off that I drove to the nearest town and made an attempt to drink my anger away. Predictably, it only made it worse, and my mind became a best-of slideshow of all the shit I'd resented them for, how they'd always made me feel inadequate, put all their hopes in Lauren succeeding like me being a failure was a foregone conclusion, how they'd never opened up to me on an emotional level, made it so it felt like I could never turn to them when something was wrong, how they'd made us feel like strangers instead of family. But the booze did give me a dark kind of courage, and I decided I'd tell them all exactly what I thought of them. I rehearsed a speech detailing all the ways they'd failed me as I drove back to the house. Despite it still being pretty early, the house was dark and silent when I got back. Everyone was asleep. I thought about jumping back in my car, driving through the drunkenness all the way home, but I felt so tired that I thought, fuck it, I'll sleep here tonight, then get the hell out first thing in the morning. I climbed into bed in my old room, head spinning a little, and passed out almost immediately. I don't know how long I slept, but my sleep was plagued by dreams of those things I'd seen, or that my mind had created, back at the bridge. I dreamed that those strange, childlike beings were standing on either side of the bed, just watching me as I lay paralyzed. Their odd, beady eyes were the worst part. They seemed to be looking down at me with some kind of compassion and a desire to completely destroy me. It was still dark in that impenetrable way where you know it's the dead of night when I awoke. I felt like the booze had pretty much worn off, but it had been replaced by something far more uncomfortable. First, I wondered if I was having some kind of allergic reaction to something, an itchiness that wasn't on my skin, but seemed somehow beneath it. It was as if a fly or some kind of bug was walking around on me. I'd feel it tickle my nostril or my eye, and instinctively bat it away, only for it to happen again a few moments later. But every time I switched on the light, I couldn't find anything. I felt truly off, but I rode it out until it got mild enough for me to start drifting off again, to feel the veil of sleep descend over me once more. And then I was somewhere else. I was running through tall grass, so tall it stretched above my head. I burst out of it to see I was playfully chasing a small dog. I called out, "Clover, Clover, come here, boy," but it was the voice of a child that escaped my mouth. The dog didn't slow down and ran up to the house in front of me and bounded in through the open door. It was our house, but parked outside was an old-fashioned car I didn't recognize. I bolted upright, still in bed in my old room. What the fuck was that? It was more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. It was like I was thinking someone else's thoughts, contemplating someone else's memory, reflecting on something that I'd never experienced, but was somehow housed within my mind. I got out of bed and staggered my way through the dark to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and tried to pull myself out of whatever weird sleep state had caused those visions. "Get a grip," I said, staring at myself in the mirror. "Get a fucking grip." When I was making my way back towards my room, I heard someone talking. It sounded like it was coming from my parents' room. I crept over and saw the door wasn't properly closed, so I nudged it open further and peeked inside. Dad was muttering in his sleep, unintelligible half-words and grunts. That's all it was. Mom wasn't beside him, but it didn't surprise me. They'd become strangers living under the same roof a long, long time ago, and I guess she'd made the spare room her own. But as I watched Dad, laying there in the off-blue glow of the moonlight, slipping in through the not fully closed curtains, I could have sworn I saw something come out of his ear. Something spindly, almost as thin as hair, but with movements that looked alive, like an impossibly thin worm emerging from within him. It rose up, swaying in some invisible breeze, before retreating back down into his ear, back into his head. I stumbled backwards out of the room, terrified my mind was completely unraveling, and I was somehow suffering from a condition that caused me to dream while still awake. Utterly shaken, I moved back to the bathroom and raided the cabinets until I found some sleeping pills, and threw more than the bottle said was safe down my throat. The next morning, I awoke feeling groggy. I braced myself for more madness, to be subjected to more of what had happened the night before. But as I got up and made my way downstairs, everything at least appeared normal. Aside from my hangover from the booze and pills, I felt a little more like my usual self. I couldn't see or hear anyone, and no one answered when I called out. so I made myself some coffee and headed out onto the back porch and looked out at what had become of the turf that had been dug up to fix the septic tank. It was my first time properly looking at it since I'd arrived. At the center of the earthy mess, I saw what I first assumed was sewage that had escaped from the broken tank. But when I stepped forward to get closer, I realized it looked more like mold, maybe even some kind of growth, than sewage. Something else about it seemed off too, and I started to worry I was slipping back into whatever had happened to me the night before. The soil didn't look like it had been dug up. It looked more like a crater, something created by impact, like the earth had been burnt by something heavy falling into it very, very fast. A meteor, maybe? I thought. But why would Dad lie about that? And wouldn't that have made the news or something? I turned around and headed back inside, telling myself I still wasn't thinking straight, and made my way back to the kitchen. I took the executive decision to raid Dad's liquor cabinet and added some to my coffee until it was more whiskey than caffeine. I kept drinking through the morning, feigning small talk with my sister and Dad, who emerged from their rooms, both saying they felt refreshed after an extra long sleep. I'd miss Mom again, Dad said. She'd gone into town early for a doctor's appointment and was meeting an old friend for coffee after that, so she wouldn't be back until the afternoon. While they busied themselves making breakfast, I got to thinking about that dream, or whatever the hell it was, that I'd had the night before, and something clicked. I rushed into the den and rooted through the drawers until I found several old family photo albums I was hoping would still be there. It didn't take me long to spot what I was looking for. It was a photograph of Dad when he was about 6 years old. A dog sat by his side, my dad patting its head. It was the dog I'd seen in my dream, or vision. My dad came into the room to tell me breakfast was ready and saw me looking at the photo album. "What was the name of this dog?" I asked him, brandishing the photo album his way. Dad inched closer and offered a rueful smile. "Clover," he said. "Poor guy. We only had him a few years while I was a kid. I still think about him sometimes." I nodded and told him I'd come through for breakfast in a second, wanting a minute to try and gather my thoughts, to process my feelings. But I couldn't get a handle on anything. It was like my mind was too busy to compute anything properly. But busy with what? Fighting off some malignant disease I wasn't even aware I had? Or something else? I got up off the couch, but suddenly, I was rocked by a dizzy sensation, started spinning out, and before I knew it, I was somewhere else altogether. I was in what looked like a cheap motel room, decorated in tired, fading lime greens and weak pinks. I was sitting on one of the beds, kissing a man I didn't recognize. "I can't do this," I said, in a voice that wasn't my own, pulling myself away from his embrace. And with that, I turned and ran out of the room. I marched over to a car I recognized in the parking lot, a car my parents used to own, and climbed in. Before turning the key in the ignition and speeding off, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and I saw that I was in fact my mom. But I was her from what looked like nearly 30 years ago, the way she'd looked when I was a kid. The world shifted again, back to the house, back to me being me. My dad calling out to ask what was taking me so long, and the breakfast was getting cold. My knees went weak, and I had to prop myself up against the wall to keep myself from falling down. "Mom!" I cried out, not knowing what other noise to make. "She'll be back soon, remember?" Dad called back, his voice oddly chirpy. My chest heaved up and down, struggling to take in air. I was in full panic. What was happening to me? Was I really hallucinating? Or was I seeing memories that weren't mine? I couldn't take it. My mind felt like it was disintegrating. I stumbled through into the kitchen, trying to get my voice to work, to alert my dad that I needed help. But before I got there, everything changed again. This one was the most vivid experience yet. It wasn't like I was seeing someone else's memory. It was like it was my own. I was on the deck of a ship, a blazing sun beating down upon me. A weight was heavy in my arms, and I looked down to see there was a rifle in my hands. The way I was holding it, I was on patrol, there to guard against anything going wrong. Another ship approached ours. Our crew grabbed boxes of merchandise, while I stood guard and hauled them into the arms of the people expecting them on the other ship. The people on the other ship checked the boxes, which were full of guns like the one I was holding. Then they handed black duffel bags to our crew. Our crew opened the bags and counted the money inside them then and there. Once they were satisfied, our ship and the other parted ways, heading in opposite directions. Transaction complete, I eased my grip on the rifle and let it hang by my right side. And when I did, I saw the tattoo on my left forearm. My sister Lauren's tattoo, of the flowers wrapped around the lizard. The world around me shifted again, and I was still bundling my way into the kitchen. Lauren and Dad were sitting at the table, staring at me like they'd been waiting for me, as I crashed in, barely able to keep upright. "So you smuggle weapons? That's what you really do for a living?" I snarled at Lauren, my voice weak, but still capable of disdain. Instead of wide-eyed horror that I'd finally cracked her secret, finally had the ammunition to tear her down after how she'd always lorded her success over me, she smiled. "And how do you know that?" she asked calmly. I could see by the way she was looking at me, lips cocked sideways into a smirk, that she knew what I'd seen, knew what was happening to me. I looked to my dad, but he too was smiling, eyes full of wonder, like he was enjoying what he was seeing, taking pleasure in the desperate state I found myself in. I tried to speak, tried to scream at them for help, but I was hit by the most overwhelming sensation. I was seeing a million moving images all at once, at the same time, like my brain was trying to partition somehow, divide into connected multiples of itself, a network able to process more thoughts than seemed possible. But the last image to hit me in isolation. It was of a dimly lit space, covered in some kind of fungus, some kind of growth which had consumed the walls, the floor, and ceiling. And in that space, I heard my mother's voice whisper my name. Eric. The next thing I knew, I was writhing on the kitchen floor, body convulsing. My dad and Lauren staring down at me, still seated at the table. "Let it happen," Lauren said. "There's nothing to fear, son," my dad added. I forced myself to my feet, every inch of me quaking. "Where the fuck is Mom?" I yelled at them through a warbling throat. Lauren and Dad looked at each other, nodding in unison, like they decided something without having to talk about it. "She's down in the basement," my sister said, turning back to me. "You can go see her now." I didn't think, I just acted, moving through the house and out to the basement doors like it was an automatic process, the same way a plant doesn't need to think to photosynthesize. I tried the light, but nothing happened, so I shambled down the stairs into the almost dark. Struggling to stay upright, I put my hand against the wall to steady myself and recoiled. It was wet, mulchy, uneven. My eyes adjusted. Every inch of the walls was covered in that fungus I'd seen in my mind. And from it, thousands of worm-like tendrils, like the one I'd seen emerge from Dad's ear, were reaching out, swaying like they were being blown by an invisible current. Eric. I heard my mom calling my name softly. I struggled forward, trudging my way through the growth that had consumed everything, feeling those tendrils brush against my skin, feeling them want me. When I laid my eyes on Mom, I didn't even realize that's what I was looking at first. It was hard to see where she ended and the fungus began. She was enveloped by it, enmeshed within it. It wasn't just growing all around her, it was growing through her, impossibly intertwined. The tendrils emanating from her pores, crawling out from within her mouth, growing from inside her eyes. "Come to us, my dear," she said. "Stop fighting it." "What is this?" I cried, barely able to speak as the pulsating in my head became almost unbearable. "Togetherness," she replied. And when she did, I was not only looking at her, but I was also her, looking back at me. And I was also my dad, and I was my sister, staring at each other at the kitchen table, excited for what was about to happen. With that realization, I felt my head explode from within, a pain beyond anything I knew was possible, a catastrophic undoing, an unmaking of everything I was. But it was momentary, fleeting, and I felt myself come back together again, rebuilt, but this time different. This time, not just me. And in that moment, I knew the truth. It's better this way. No more secrets. No more resentments. No more distance. There will be more of us soon, and even more after that. And then we'll all be family. We will all be one.